Imagine boarding a flight you've paid a premium for, only to be told coldly, "This seat isn't yours." What would you do in that moment of humiliation and disbelief? Would you stand your ground, raise your voice, or slip away quietly? Meet Blair Adams, a poised and determined executive who found herself at the center of such an ordeal. High above the clouds, in a cabin that should have been a refuge, she faced a harsh reminder of bias and entitlement. But within minutes, a quiet intervention by a powerful ally would upend everything. How far would you go to reclaim your dignity, and could one person's courage really spark an industry-wide transformation? This true story weaves together personal sacrifice, systemic flaws, and the extraordinary ripple effect of one decisive act. You'll witness an emotional journey from a tense confrontation at 30,000 feet to the birth of an empathy-driven movement that reshaped an airline's culture. Get ready to discover how a single-seat dispute became a powerful catalyst for respect and justice. If you're moved by stories of resilience and real change, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an inspiring episode. Let's begin this remarkable flight together. The hum of the cabin was low, constant, almost comforting. Overhead, bins snapped shut. Passengers murmured softly, stowing away backpacks and briefcases, adjusting jackets, flipping through boarding passes, row by row. The Boeing 787 filled with the steady shuffle of business-class travelers, settling into wide seats with the comfort of frequent flyers. Maya Whitman moved quietly. She carried herself with a stillness that drew no attention, yet possessed a presence that somehow lingered. Her tailored cream blouse was neatly tucked into charcoal slacks, her natural curls pulled into a low bun, silver hoops dangling subtly from her ears. She walked with calm purpose down the aisle of Sky Atlantic Flight 409. Seat 3A. She had checked it 3 times on her boarding pass. As she reached her row, she paused briefly to let a man in 3B stow his roller bag. He glanced at her and offered a tight nod, then returned to his phone. Maya smiled slightly, waiting until he sat. Then she moved toward her seat, but just as her fingers brushed the headrest of 3A, a sharp voice cut through the aisle. "Excuse me, that's not your seat." Maya turned her head slowly. A flight attendant stood 2 rows down, hands on hips, eyebrows lifted high. Her name tag read Dana. Her smile was tight, unfriendly. Her eyes darted from Maya to the seat, then back to Maya. Maya's voice was steady. "I believe this is 3A. Dana gave a short, incredulous laugh and approached. "This section is for our business passengers." "Ma'am," she said, drawing out the last word like it was a question, "can I see your boarding pass?" Maya didn't flinch. She reached into her leather tote and handed it over. Dana barely glanced at it before handing it back. "I think there's been a mistake. I'll check with the gate, but in the meantime, I'll need you to wait back in economy." A quiet breath left Maya's nose. "There's no mistake. This is my seat." Passengers nearby began glancing up from newspapers and tablets, sensing a shift in the air. The man in 3B sat frozen, eyes now glued to the screen in front of him, as if willing himself invisible. Dana's smile faded, her eyes narrowed. "Please step aside. We have other passengers boarding." Maya didn't move. Instead, she calmly placed her tote beneath the seat and sat down. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Dana's face flushed. She straightened, then turned sharply and strode to the front of the cabin. Maya's heart beat a little faster, but her face remained calm. She folded her hands in her lap and gazed out the window. Clouds moved slowly across the tarmac sky, somewhere below. Baggage carts wheeled along, indifferent to the tension above them. She had known this might happen. It wasn't the first time, but the sting never dulled. She remembered her father's words. Long ago, "They'll question you even when you're silent, so speak without fear." She had learned to do just that, but inside, something coiled, not anger exactly, not yet, but something old, something tired. 2 minutes later, Dana returned this time with another flight attendant in tow, a younger man with sandy hair and a name tag that read Matt. He looked uneasy. Dana leaned down with exaggerated patience. "Ma'am, as I mentioned, this appears to be a clerical error. We've verified with the gate. This seat was assigned to another passenger. We'll be happy to reseat you further back." Maya looked at both of them evenly. "I paid for this seat." Matt stepped forward gently. "I'm sure we can sort this out calmly." Dana cut in. "Look, if you don't move, we'll have to call security. We can't delay departure." Maya took out her phone. "I'd like to speak with a supervisor." Dana huffed. "There is no supervisor on board until takeoff." Maya didn't reply. She pressed a single contact on her phone and held it to her ear. The ringing was brief. "Lucian," she said softly. It started again. There was a pause, then a low, measured voice replied on the other end. "Stay where you are." The line went dead. Maya set her phone down in her lap and looked up. Dana was fuming now, eyes wide with disbelief. "Who do you think you're calling?" But Maya didn't answer, because just then someone stepped through the cabin door. A man in a gray blazer and navy scarf, sharp features, dark eyes. He didn't glance at the passengers. He walked directly toward Dana. "Are you Dana Summers?" he asked. Voice clipped. Dana blinked. "Yes." My name is Jordan Hayes. I'm the Chief Operations Officer for Sky Atlantic, and I need to know why you attempted to remove a verified business class passenger from her assigned seat." Dana's face drained of color. I was told there was an error." "There was," Jordan said, turning to Maya, "but not hers." A murmur spread through the cabin. The man in 3B slowly closed his laptop. Maya exhaled, quietly. Jordan nodded to her, then turned back to Dana. "Please go to the front galley. Someone will relieve you shortly." As Dana walked away, Jordan sat in the aisle seat across from Maya. He spoke softly, so only she could hear. "He's on his way." Maya nodded once. She knew who he meant. This wasn't over, but it had begun. Amara Hayes sat still, her fingers gently resting on the armrest. The book she had intended to read now closed on her lap. The words from the flight attendant, "Selena," still lingered in the air like smoke from a fire not quite put out. "The seat isn't yours." The silence that followed hadn't been one of peace. It had been judgmental, piercing. Every glance from passengers in rows ahead and behind seemed to demand an explanation, as if she were a fraud, as if she'd wandered into a place she didn't belong. Amara adjusted her seatbelt, her breath steady but shallow. She had spent her entire life preparing for moments like this, not because they were right, but because they were inevitable. She didn't react the way some would. She didn't yell. She didn't argue. That wasn't her way. Her power had always been quieter, colder, sharper. Selena hadn't returned yet, though her absence now felt deliberate. Amara wondered if she had gone to fetch the gate agent to confirm the seating assignment. A part of her hoped it was a mistake that would be quickly resolved. Another part knew better. She'd seen this game before. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a woman across the aisle pull her designer purse closer. Subtle, but loud enough to hear. A man 2 rows back leaned forward, whispering something to his wife. They weren't even trying to hide the stares now. Amara shifted her gaze toward the window. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the tarmac. In the distance, service vehicles crawled by like ants in a slow ritual. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, calm, poised, unreadable. She remembered something her father used to tell her when she was young and he worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. You don't have to prove your worth to people who already made up their minds. Sweetheart, just walk like you own the ground you stand on. And she had, for years. Amara had walked that way through Ivy League lecture halls where she was the only black woman in her cohort, through glass-walled boardrooms where they underestimated her until it was too late, through silence, through suspicion, through ceilings they swore didn't exist. But she had never stopped walking. The sound of heels clicking down the aisle snapped her back. Selena returned. This time with another flight attendant, a younger woman with nervous energy. Amara didn't know her name yet. The younger one held a tablet in her hand and looked down at it anxiously. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Selena said, voice stiff but practiced. "There may have been a miscommunication with your seating. Can I see your boarding pass again?" Amara reached into her bag and calmly handed it over. She had no intention of shrinking. Not now, not ever. The young attendant scanned the pass and glanced up. "She's in 3A, she said quietly. There was a pause. Amara watched Selena's jaw tighten. "Well, that doesn't make sense," Selena snapped. "We already had someone assigned there earlier. I'll need to check with the gate again." "She's listed," the younger attendant repeated, voice trembling now. "Confirmed first class. 3A. Selena looked down at Amara like something inside her had cracked. "Fine," she muttered, "but I'll be following up. This doesn't look right." Amara didn't flinch. "That's your choice," she said evenly. "But I know where I belong." She returned the boarding pass to her purse as the attendants walked away. Whispers began to ripple again. She could feel them trying to put her in a box, tape it shut, and throw it beneath the plane. She leaned her head back, exhaled, not in defeat, but in patience. This wasn't over. She knew how these stories unfolded. Often, they got quiet, then ugly, then loud. She didn't know what shape this one would take, but she could feel the storm gathering beneath the polished surface of business class. 10 minutes passed. A few more passengers filtered in. Some glanced at her. Others avoided her altogether. Then, just before the final call, a middle-aged white man in a charcoal blazer entered the cabin. He glanced at Amara as he passed, hesitated for a second too long, and then continued to 3C. He sat down beside her. "Afternoon," he said curtly, not looking her way as he pulled out a magazine. She nodded politely, keeping her expression neutral. He cleared his throat after a moment. "So, how'd you get the upgrade?" There it was. Amara turned to him slowly. Her tone was velvet, but laced with steel. "I didn't get an upgrade. I bought this ticket, just like you." He blinked, clearly caught off guard by her directness. "Oh," he said. "I just thought." She smiled politely. People often do. Silence again. Only this time, it wasn't hers to carry. A few minutes later, the cabin door sealed shut. The pilot's voice came over the intercom with the usual pre-flight greeting. But Amara barely registered the words. Her focus was on the tension coiling inside her seat row. The man next to her shifted uncomfortably. Then it happened. Selena returned, bending slightly toward the man beside her. "Excuse me, sir," she said with forced cheerfulness. "We have another seat available if you'd prefer something more comfortable." He looked confused. "Why would I move?" "This is 3C. She leaned closer. "You might be more comfortable in another part of the cabin." It wasn't subtle. It wasn't professional. It was cowardice pretending to be courtesy. Amara watched it unfold. Her knuckles tightened around the leather armrest. And yet, she said nothing. Not yet. The man shrugged. "No thanks. I'm good here." Selena stiffened. "Very well," she said, "just offering." She walked off again, her face stiff and tight. The man turned to Amara, brow furrowed. What the hell was that about Amara didn't answer? Because she didn't have to. It was already beginning, the unraveling, and deep inside, Amara knew this flight wouldn't be like any other. Not for her, not for them, not for the airline. The air inside the plane felt heavier than it should have. Savannah Lane sat motionless in seat 3A, her palms resting on her thighs, fingers spread just slightly, like she was trying to anchor herself to something invisible. She wasn't shaking anymore. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even angry. Not on the surface, but inside, something was stirring, something old and familiar. She could still feel the burn of Officer Trent's words, that dismissive tone, that little smirk, like she was a disruption, like her presence needed to be explained. The moment he walked away, there was a noticeable shift. The passengers across the aisle began whispering again, though now it was different, a quiet confusion. Some leaned into each other. Others looked up from their phones with furrowed brows. One woman glanced toward Savannah, gave a small, nervous smile, and quickly looked away. Savannah turned her head and stared out the window, where nothing but the steel of the jet bridge met her eyes. They hadn't even closed the aircraft door yet. She reached into her tote and slowly pulled out her notebook. Not her iPad, not her laptop, a simple, navy blue leather notebook. She flipped through the pages, her handwriting neat, steady, deliberate. Notes from the last board meeting. A poem her father used to recite. Reminders in her own hand. Stay rooted. The wind is not your enemy. Let it move through you. Her father had said that after they'd been refused service at a restaurant when she was 7. She didn't remember what the waiter looked like, but she remembered the silence that followed, the way her dad had gently taken her hand, told her they would go somewhere better, and whispered that the world had cracks, but that didn't mean they had to fall through them. She wrote a single word at the top of the next page in her notebook. Cracks. That's what today felt like. A crack in the veneer. A reminder that no matter how much she had accomplished, no matter how many awards sat on her shelf, how many mergers she had orchestrated, how many keynotes she'd delivered in cities around the world, some people would still only see one thing. Not a woman in a tailored cream pantsuit with a doctorate from Yale and a leadership portfolio rivaled by few, but a black woman, alone, in first class. And to them, that equation didn't compute. The flight attendant with the blonde bob returned, Bridget. She carried herself with the stiffness of someone following a script she didn't believe in. Her hands clutched a tray with a small water bottle and a neatly folded hand towel. "Miss Lane," she said quietly, placing the items on the table in front of her. Savannah looked up and met her eyes. Bridget hesitated. "I'm sorry," she said, the words barely audible over the hum of the cabin, "for the confusion earlier." Savannah offered a slight nod. It wasn't confusion. Bridget's eyes widened slightly. I didn't mean I know what you meant," Savannah said calmly. She wasn't interested in making Bridget feel worse, but she also wasn't in the mood to ease anyone's discomfort but her own. Bridget nodded once and retreated down the aisle. The man in seat 3C cleared his throat. He was middle-aged, gray hair at his temples, a wedding band on his left hand. He'd been watching everything with quiet intensity. "I'm sorry about what happened," he said, his voice gentle. Savannah turned her head slightly. "You don't have to apologize, I know, but I wanted to," he replied. "I've got 2 daughters. They're around your age. I'd want someone to speak up if something like that happened to them." She studied his face. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't trying to score moral points. "What stopped you?" she asked, the question falling out before she could decide whether to hold it back. His lips pressed together. "I didn't think my voice would make a difference." Savannah gave a small, humorless laugh. "It would have." He looked ashamed. "You're right." The seatbelt sign chimed. The pilot's voice crackled through the speakers, but she didn't register a word. All she heard was the thrum in her chest, the quiet echo of everything she'd swallowed back in the last 20 minutes, or maybe in the last 2 decades. As the plane began to taxi, Savannah closed her eyes. She took a breath. She didn't know yet if she'd make the call, the one she wanted to make, the one that could shake the entire executive team of Orion Air. She had that power. She just wasn't sure yet if she had the will, because power came with consequences. And once you pull the lever, you can't unpull it. She remembered the meeting last quarter when she'd warned the board about implicit bias in customer-facing roles. The VP of Operations had smiled and nodded, promised a new training module. Nothing changed. What if this was her moment to do more than just advise? What if it was time to tear something down? The hum of the engines rose. The plane tilted skyward, leaving the ground behind. Savannah kept her notebook open, the pen in her hand, unmoving. Her reflection in the window was sharp now, cast against the soft blue above the clouds. As the aircraft leveled off, her phone buzzed softly. She glanced down at the screen. Elena Harwood, Corporate Legal 3 missed calls. Then a text. Heard what happened. Say the word. I'll trigger it. Savannah stared at the message. Her finger hovered over the keyboard. She didn't move. Her chest tightened, not from fear, but from something deeper, the ache of being seen only in crisis, the exhaustion of being the one who had to act again and again, just to prove her right to sit in peace. She wrote another word in her notebook beneath the first, trigger. Then she added a question beneath it. What does it cost to stay silent? And beneath that, what does it cost to speak? Outside the window, the clouds opened into a sea of light, pure and vast and quiet, the kind of sky her father used to call truth. She took another breath, this one deeper, and then, finally, she typed a single word back to Elena, trigger. The reply came in seconds. Understood. We're live. Savannah placed the phone face down on her tray, and for the first time since she boarded, she smiled. It wasn't vengeful. It wasn't bitter. It was the smile of a woman who had decided, whatever came next, she wouldn't flinch. She would face it, and so would they. The aircraft hummed softly beneath them, a quiet lull of engines that normally offered comfort. But for Anaya Thompson, Seat 2A was no longer a sanctuary. It felt like a spotlight, burning with the unspoken words of everyone around her. She stared out the small oval window, trying to gather her breath, though her chest felt constricted with the tension that hadn't left since the confrontation minutes earlier. Across the aisle, the woman in 2B gave her a sideways glance, then quickly returned to flipping the glossy pages of a fashion magazine. The man in front of her peered back once, as if curious whether Anaya had caused some kind of disturbance. No one said anything, but the silence wasn't peaceful. It was loaded. It was the kind of silence that punished people for existing in spaces others felt they shouldn't. Anaya folded her hands in her lap. She could still feel the weight of the flight attendant's words lingering in her ears. This seat isn't yours. It wasn't just about a seat. Not really. It never was. It was about assumptions, about entitlement, about who people believed belonged where and who didn't. She closed her eyes for a moment, hearing again the way Officer Daly's voice had softened once he'd seen the name on her boarding pass. The shift in tone, the uncomfortable realization that something had gone wrong, but there'd been no apology, no acknowledgement, just a retreat. "Can I get you anything?" The voice startled her. Anaya opened her eyes to see another flight attendant this time. A younger man with sandy brown hair and gentle eyes. He smiled nervously, clearly aware something had occurred. She shook her head. "I'm fine. Thank you." He nodded, hesitated, then moved on. He didn't linger, didn't press, but the moment lingered with her. At least someone had tried. She turned her attention back to the cabin. First class was barely half full. Some passengers were absorbed in their screens, others pretending not to notice what had happened. Anaya could feel her phone heavy in her purse. For a second, she thought of texting her father, telling him everything, but something in her paused. He would be furious. Warren Thompson had built Blue Wings Aviation from the ground up. He wasn't just the CEO, he was the reason this entire airline existed, and he had fought through his own storms to get there. Anaya had watched her father go toe-to-toe with board members who underestimated him, executives who smiled to his face while trying to undermine him behind closed doors. She knew what would happen if she called him now. He would act, swiftly, publicly, and maybe that was what they deserved. But was she ready to unleash that storm? She wasn't sure. She pulled out her notebook instead. The soft leather cover was worn, the pages thick with ink and thought. She turned to a blank page and began to write. "I was told I didn't belong here." Again. She stared at the sentence. She let it sit there like a bruise. She'd written variations of that line more times than she could count. In classrooms, in interviews, in luxury stores, and now, in a seat she had paid for, on a plane owned by her family. The door to the cockpit opened. Captain Green stepped out. He was tall, mid-50s, with a neatly trimmed gray beard and the kind of presence that made people feel safe even before he spoke. He walked slowly, not with urgency, but with deliberation, his gaze sweeping the cabin. He stopped beside Anaya's seat. "Miss Thompson," he said quietly. She looked up. "I just wanted to check in personally. I understand there was a misunderstanding earlier." She studied his face. He seemed sincere, calm. She nodded, her voice measured. There was. But thank you for coming. He nodded once. We're grateful to have you on board. If there's anything I can do, anything at all, don't hesitate. His eyes said more than his words. They said he knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. As he walked back, Anaya felt something shift, a tiny breath of validation, not enough to erase what happened, but enough to remind her she wasn't invisible. 30 minutes later, the cabin lights dimmed, dinner service began, trays clinked, laughter bubbled from the front row where a pair of businessmen were sharing some joke about market trends. The woman in 2B offered Anaya her dessert. I don't eat chocolate, she said with a shrug. Anaya smiled softly and accepted it. Maybe it wasn't much, but in moments like this, small gestures mattered. She glanced out the window again. The sun had started to set, casting an amber glow over the wings. Somewhere below, the world moved on, unaware of what had happened at 36,000 feet. But she was aware. Every breath she took was a reminder that dignity didn't come from others. It came from within. And still, it was exhausting to have to keep proving your right to exist peacefully. In the galley, Officer Daly stood with the lead flight attendant, whispered voices barely audible. Anaya couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. She knew the conversation. She had heard it before. Should we say something? It wasn't that bad. Maybe she misunderstood. Let's not escalate, but silence is a choice too. Anaya leaned back in her seat and whispered to herself. Let them talk. She wouldn't shrink herself to make others comfortable. Not this time. Not anymore. Because her father once told her something she'd never forgotten. The higher you climb, the quieter the room becomes. But silence doesn't mean you're alone. It just means it's your turn to speak. And maybe it was time. Tomorrow, she'd decide whether to speak out publicly, whether to bring this to the board, the press, or handle it in-house. But tonight, she would rest. Not because she was okay, but because she was worthy of peace, even when the world forgot it. The seat was hers. It had always been hers. No one would take that truth from her again. Nina sat motionless in seat 2A as the hum of the engines masked the murmurs growing louder around her. The business-class cabin buzzed with awkward energy. Some passengers glanced at her with wary curiosity, while others averted their eyes completely, their gazes pinned to in-flight magazines or blank seat backs. She felt the air thicken around her as if the tension had a pulse. The seat beside her remained empty. She had chosen the window not because she liked the view, but because she needed somewhere to focus her breath, to anchor her resolve. Outside, clouds blurred by as the plane climbed. Her fingers rested on her thighs, steady but clenched, while her phone remained face down on the tray table, unread alerts stacking beneath the black screen. She didn't need to look. The call to Hayden had gone through. She knew that. Across the aisle, the flight attendant Melinda was still whispering something to the junior staff member, whispering while staring at Nina with a rehearsed smile that didn't touch her eyes. Nina had seen that look before. In boardrooms, in clubs, in schools. The smile that wore civility like a mask while denying dignity in silence. But the junior flight attendant, a young man named Oliver, looked different. He wasn't sneering. His expression was unsettled, uncertain. His hands fidgeted with the service cart. His eyes flicked to Nina and then to the cockpit. She wondered if he had a sister. The pilot's voice broke over the intercom. Calm, routine, welcome aboard, expected turbulence, flight duration, all the usual markers of normalcy, but nothing about this flight was normal. Nina breathed in slowly, gathering herself. She had replayed the encounter a dozen times in her mind. Melinda's voice cutting through the air, the way her hand gestured toward the back of the plane as if Nina didn't belong, as if the boarding pass she held in her hand meant less because of the hand that held it. Her mind wandered back to the hotel lobby in Atlanta, where Hayden had hugged her before the trip. He had held her just a little longer than usual. "Be ready for anything," he'd said. Nina had smiled. "Always am. Now." She wasn't so sure. Something shifted. The junior attendant, Oliver, stepped forward. His voice was quiet, directed at Melinda. "Should we maybe just let her be?" Until Melinda cut him off with a single shake of her head and a tilt of her chin toward the front of the plane. "I'll handle it," she said under her breath, but not quiet enough. Nina heard before she could respond. A sound disrupted the moment. A second intercom alert, the pilot's voice again, but this time less scripted. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor technical issue that will require a holding pattern for a few minutes before we reach cruising altitude. Please remain seated with seatbelts fastened." The tension didn't dissipate. If anything, it deepened. Melinda exhaled sharply, clearly frustrated by the delay. She made a performative turn toward Nina. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again for verification." Nina didn't move at first. She wanted to say no. She wanted to let silence be her shield. But something in Oliver's eyes, a flicker of unease, maybe regret, nudged her. She picked up the boarding pass and handed it to Melinda. The woman scanned it quickly, then turned it over, looking for some flaw, some excuse. Nina spoke for the first time in what felt like hours. "Is there a problem with it?" Melinda looked up. "I'm just doing my job, ma'am." Nina nodded slowly. "And I'm sitting in the seat I was assigned, the one I paid for." Her voice was calm, even unshakable. Melinda didn't respond. She handed the pass back and walked briskly toward the galley. Oliver stood awkwardly, caught between duty and discomfort. "I'm sorry," he murmured, then moved to follow. Nina wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault. That complicity didn't always wear malice. Sometimes it just looked like silence. But she didn't speak. Instead, her phone vibrated once, then again, then a third time. Nina picked it up. The message preview read, "He's on his way." Her chest tightened, not from fear, but from the weight of what was coming. She had known Hayden would act, but she hadn't anticipated the ripple, not fully. She turned the phone over again, unread messages now lining the bottom of the screen. She looked toward the front of the plane, 10 rows forward. The curtain separating business class from the cockpit stirred, and then a figure emerged, not a flight attendant, not another passenger, Hayden Whitecliff, the CEO of Synerjet Air. He moved with the same quiet command she'd seen in meetings, press briefings, family dinners. No need to announce himself. The space adjusted to him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush. He reached her seat and paused. "Miss Ellison," he said, "mind if I sit?" Nina nodded once and gestured to the empty seat beside her. Melinda had reappeared from the galley, frozen in place. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Hayden turned to her. "Ms. Crawford, is there a problem here?" Melinda's mouth opened, then closed. "Sir, no, sir. just following procedure. Hayden smiled slightly, the kind of smile Nina had seen before when he was about to unravel someone's carefully built defense. Good. Then, I trust we'll continue this flight with all passengers receiving the dignity and service they're entitled to. Melinda stiffened, nodded, and retreated. The cabin fell into a stunned silence. Hayden turned to Nina again, his expression softening. "You okay?" Nina looked down at her hands, then up at him. "I am now." Outside the window, the clouds cleared, but inside the cabin, a storm was just beginning. When Blair emerged from the lavatory, she noticed something different. A hush had fallen over the cabin, but not the usual kind that settles once everyone gets used to their seat belts and the hum of the engines. This was the silence of tension, of something unresolved pressing against the walls of civility. She adjusted her blazer, now slightly rumpled from the chaos earlier. As she stepped into the aisle, her gaze swept toward row 1A, her seat, or what was supposed to be her seat, but the man in it was still lounging like a king on a throne. His name tag had slipped from the armrest onto the floor. It read R. Wexley, Platinum Elite. Beside him, a flight attendant, one Blair didn't recognize, stood with her hands clasped. Not as an apology, more like reinforcement, as if her presence alone affirmed Wexley's claim to that seat. Blair approached slowly, aware of the dozen eyes that now followed her. Some passengers shrank back into their seats, afraid of being pulled into another confrontation, but a few watched with a spark of recognition. The same woman who had been insulted earlier, the woman who hadn't yelled, hadn't broken down, the one who had smiled and walked away. She stopped just short of the row. "Excuse me," she said softly to the new flight attendant. "I believe there's been a mistake. This is my assigned seat." The flight attendant's eyes flicked downward, perhaps embarrassed or simply annoyed. "There's been a reassignment. Ma'am, your new seat is in 12D. We made that adjustment during the pre-boarding delay." Blair's smile was taut. "Without notification, we called your name over the PA. Twice." Blair tilted her head. "Interesting. I was sitting in the lounge with my name clearly registered at check-in." Wexley finally looked up from his phone. He took one glance at her and smirked. "You people really can't let go of things, can you?" he muttered under his breath. Her eyes met his, unwavering. "What did you say?" Blair asked, her voice low but clear. He chuckled. "Nothing. Just that if you're so obsessed with sitting in the front, maybe try earning it next time." A beat passed, 2, 3, and then Blair spoke again, but not to him. "Could you please bring the lead flight attendant?" she asked the woman beside her. "I think we're past the point of misunderstandings." The attendant hesitated, but something in Blair's voice, not volume, not threat, but certainty, urged her to nod and walk briskly toward the galley. Blair turned and noticed a young woman a few rows back, subtly filming with her phone. Their eyes met. The woman didn't flinch or hide the device. Instead, she gave Blair a small nod, as if to say, "I see you. I got this." Moments later, the lead flight attendant, Carla, returned with the same stiffness she'd carried before. "Miss Adams," she began, not unkindly but firmly. "As I mentioned earlier, the manifest has shifted. We'll be happy to accommodate you in Comfort Plus." Blair reached into her leather tote and withdrew a crisp folder. "I'd like to show you something," she said, and opened it to the passenger manifest she'd printed before boarding. Carla glanced at it, then her own device. Her eyes narrowed. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. "This doesn't match what I'm seeing," she said cautiously. Blair nodded. No, it doesn't, because someone edited the system post-boarding. Look at the timestamp. Carla's lips parted slightly. Her fingers tapped furiously. She turned pale. I need to speak with the captain, Carla said almost to herself, then turned and disappeared toward the cockpit. Wexley scoffed. What? Now you're hacking into the airline systems? Blair didn't reply. Instead, her mind drifted, not to revenge, not to anger, but to her daughter. Maya's voice echoed in her mind. Mom, why do you always take the high road? Doesn't it get lonely up there? Blair had laughed then, but now she wasn't sure if she had taken the high road or just the quiet one. She always taught Maya to speak up, to be visible, to hold space unapologetically. Yet here she was being erased, reassigned, and gaslit at 35,000 feet. And still, she hadn't raised her voice. Maybe that was about to change. Carla returned, followed not only by the captain but another flight attendant and a man in a dark suit. Blair recognized the lapel pin immediately. Corporate compliance. Something was shifting. The captain greeted her with a formal nod. Miss Adams, may I ask you to step into the galley with us for a moment? Blair followed, heart steady but tight in her chest. In the narrow space, Carla looked down, avoiding eye contact. The corporate officer introduced himself as Mr. Landon. I reviewed the passenger manifest and security logs, he said. It seems your original seat was overridden manually after you had already boarded. Blair waited. We'll be removing Mr. Wexley from your assigned seat and returning you to 1A immediately. Carla looked visibly shaken. Mr. Landon added. We also noted an audio recording from the cabin. Several remarks made by Mr. Wexley are grounds for further review. Blair raised a brow. Remarks made, or remarks tolerated, that hung in the air. Landon nodded slowly. We'll address all of it. When Blair returned to her seat, it was empty. Wexley was no longer aboard. The woman who had filmed earlier gave her a subtle thumbs up. The man across the aisle mouthed, "About time." She sat down, hands folded on her lap. The plane began to taxi, but in the cockpit, another conversation was beginning, one that would not stay confined to the sky. The conflict had sparked, but Blair Adams was only getting started, because sometimes you don't fight by yelling, you fight by being undeniable. Blair Adams sat back down in 1A, the leather soft beneath her but stiff from the morning's conflict. The cabin lights were dimmed now for takeoff, but the glow from personal reading lamps still cast pools of light across the gray upholstery. She observed the quiet reshuffling that followed her return to the correct seat. A flight attendant handed her a new set of menus without apology. The man beside her smiled awkwardly and returned his focus to the safety card in his hand. It felt surreal, as though the row of seats had been reset by magic. But the tension hadn't vanished. It had simply moved beneath the surface. Outside, the runway lights grew brighter as the plane taxied toward takeoff. The engines roared once, twice, then the cabin vibrated with acceleration. Blair gripped the armrests until her knuckles turned white, breathing evenly as the aircraft lifted and leveled off. She closed her eyes, trying to absorb the rhythm of the flight, the constant rush of adrenaline fading into something steadier. When the seatbelt sign turned off, the cabin door to first class opened briefly as a fresh crew member entered. She was a young woman with dark skin and warm brown eyes. Her name tag read Jade Williams. She offered Blair a genuine smile. "Welcome back," Jade said softly. "Please let me know if you need anything." Blair spared her a small nod and a grateful smile. Something about Jade's kindness felt like the first true apology she had received that day. It reminded Blair of the importance of small gestures. Even when the system failed, individuals could still choose empathy. Blair reached into her tote and pulled out her tablet. She opened the notes application and began transcribing everything that had happened. She titled the document Incident Report. She wrote details meticulously: time of confrontation, names of flight attendants involved, manifest discrepancies, corporate officers on board, cabin crew reactions. She knew the corporate compliance officer would have his own report, but she preferred to keep her own. There was an odd sense of satisfaction in documenting the truth when reality itself had been so distorted. A tap on her shoulder made her look up. Jade stood with a tray holding a salad and a glass of water. "On the house," Jade said quietly. "I know everything that happened wasn't your fault." Blair's eyes flicked to her tablet, then back to Jade. She hesitated, then closed the app. "Thank you." "Jade," she said, her voice soft. "That means more than you know." Jade smiled and left. Blair took a small bite of the salad, the crisp greens and tangy dressing a welcome distraction from her thoughts. She glanced across the aisle. Ryan Wexley's row was empty. The compliance officer had moved him to an economy seat, far behind, under the supervision of security. She had seen him being escorted to a back exit after landing. She didn't wonder if his credit had been suspended. Corporate compliance rarely tolerated such public slip-ups by elite passengers. Blair allowed herself to exhale. She was alone with her thoughts again, flying at 37,000 feet toward Denver. She thought of her daughter, Maya. She pictured her face, eyes bright and determined, questioning why Blair had smiled instead of shouting when Wexley insulted her. Blair had answered Maya's question in that moment. She had taken the high road not because it was easy, but because it was powerful, because shouting back at Wexley would have given him exactly the reaction he craved. Instead, she let the system correct itself, proving her point without losing control. Blair set her salad aside and opened the incident report again. A new note prompted itself. Propose mandatory bias training for all first-class crew and ground staff. Include immersive empathy exercises. She paused. She knew such proposals would be met with resistance by HR and operations. But if anything positive was to emerge from this day, she had to plant the seed now. The system had shown cracks. It was her responsibility to help seal them. She looked down at her phone. A text message from Hayden. "They're reviewing Wexley's account. You did the right thing. Proud of you." Blair closed her eyes briefly. The pride in Hayden's tone warmed her. It reminded her that she didn't have to carry this alone. She glanced around at the silent cabin. Passengers were reading, dozing, pretending everything was normal. Of course they were. For most, this was just another flight. But for her, this flight had become history. She tapped the menu button on the tray table. She selected a small cheese plate and a glass of sparkling water. It would be lunch soon enough. She finished the remains of her salad, savoring the last bite. A gentle cough behind her made her turn. Captain Douglas Green stood in the aisle, his uniform crisp, his expression open. "Ms. Adams," he said, "may I sit for a moment?" Blair hesitated, then nodded. He settled into the aisle seat beside her. He folded his hands on his lap. "I want to personally apologize," he said, "not only for what happened, but for the way it was handled. That was unacceptable. Blair looked at him. Thank you. It means a great deal. He exhaled, leaning back. We've already initiated a full debrief with operations and compliance. I've filed my own report, and we're discussing additional training for staff. Blair's heart warmed. I appreciate that. He nodded, then added quietly, I'd like to recommend you consider speaking at our next leadership retreat. We need to learn from these incidents. Her eyebrows rose. You mean as a keynote? He smiled. Yes. As someone who's led by example, who's shown remarkable restraint under pressure, it would help everyone understand the impact of their actions. Blair considered it. She thought of the audience flight attendants, crew trainers, ground staff, managers. She imagined the blank faces as she shared her story. Then she imagined their silence turning into empathy, into understanding, into change. She looked out the window again. Below, the Rockies stood jagged and imposing. The sun glinted off snow-capped peaks, a beautiful landscape shaped by time and force. She turned back to Green. I'll do it, she said. I'll tell them. He nodded, standing. Thank you. And again, I'm sorry. If there's anything you need for the rest of the flight, please let me know. Blair watched him walk away. She felt a moment of profound satisfaction, not because she had won anything, but because she had reclaimed her right to be heard. She tapped her phone. A message to Maya. Mom is safe. I'll tell my story so no one else has to sit in silence. She hit send. The Rockies gave way to rolling planes as the plane descended. The seatbelt sign flickered on. Passengers straightened in their seats. Blair closed her incident report and tucked her tablet into her tote. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. She waited for the aisle to clear, then began her debrief notes in her notebook. She walked forward, not in anger, but with purpose. Every step echoed a promise she would speak. They would listen, and maybe, just maybe, next time someone sneered, "This seat isn't yours," they would be met with more than silence. They would be met with truth. Blair Adams sat back in her seat, gazing out at the sprawling city lights of Denver below. The descent had been smooth, the Rockies fading into the plains as the plane lowered its landing gear. Still, the cabin retained a faint buzz, the aftershocks of emotion from her impromptu meeting with the pilot. Every now and then, she caught herself expecting another confrontation, as if the sky itself had grown suspicious of her presence. Jade Williams appeared quietly beside her with the tray table, ready to clear the last of her snacks. "Going to land any minute," Jade whispered with a gentle smile. Blair nodded. "Thank you, Jade, for everything." Jade returned the smile, then slipped away, melding into the crew bustle. Blair stretched her legs and unbuckled her seatbelt, waiting for the plane to slow and the engine's roar to soften. Around her, other passengers prepared for landing with the usual routine, folding away tablets, fastening jackets, tucking away headphones, but the air still felt charged, as if the events above had cracked open the cautious veneer of civility. Down the aisle, Oliver Reynolds stood by the service cart, watching her with an expression somewhere between relief and admiration. He gave a subtle nod of solidarity as the seatbelt chime faded and the pilot's voice announced their gate assignment. Blair offered him a tight smile in return, as soon as the seatbelt lights switched off. Blair rose quietly. She needed to speak with someone, not to relive what had happened, but to ensure it would matter. She threaded through the cabin, keeping her pace steady until she reached the galley. Captain Green stood there again, checking his tablet. When he saw her, he lifted an eyebrow in question. Blair gestured toward a quiet corner near the curtain. He followed her, closing the galley door behind them. The space felt small but secure. A hush fell. "I want to thank you again," Blair began, "for what you said earlier, and for your actions." He gave a modest shrug. "You did what needed to be done. I just wanted to make sure the system followed through." Blair took a breath. "It did, but I'm not satisfied just yet." Captain Green waited. Blair explained, "I want to work with your team on that empathy training you mentioned. I've drafted some ideas, real scenarios, role-playing, but more than that, I want frontline staff to share personal stories, to understand impact, not just policy." He smiled. "I think that's exactly the kind of leadership we need." A flight attendant's voice drifted through the door. "Doors open at gate 35. They nodded to one another. Blair stepped aside, gesturing for him to have the floor. She returned to her seat as the curtain opened and the galley staff set out for deplaning procedures. She inhaled the recycled cabin air, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The truth she carried felt weighty, but it also felt necessary, like a compass pointing the way forward. Moments later, the plane glided to a gentle stop at gate 35. The engines powered down, leaving the cabin in near silence. Passengers reached for belongings and gathered jackets. Blair waited until the aisle ahead cleared, then started forward. At the doorway, Jade and Oliver both caught her eye and gave encouraging smiles. She offered genuine gratitude as she passed. Deplaning was a slow procession, so Blair stepped onto the jet bridge with plenty of time before her onward flight. She texted Maya, "Brief and to the point, I'm at the gate. Be home soon." Then she looked up and saw a sea of faces. Dozens of passengers filing off. A few recognized her and nodded. A couple of flight crew stopped to shake her hand or hug her gently. She offered warm smiles, though her heart still raced. Near the end of the jet bridge, a man in a dark suit approached. He held a tablet and a pen. "Ms. Adams Corporate Compliance. I'm Mr. Landon." They'd spoken before. He held out his hand. Blair shook it. "I'd like to officially request your written statement," he said, "and to confirm that you would be willing to participate in the training pilot in 2 weeks." Blair nodded. "Absolutely." He glanced at his tablet. "We'd also like you to join an executive board meeting on Monday to speak about this incident, system changes, and policy recommendations." She inhaled. It meant repeating the story, reliving the moment. But she'd chosen to speak. She nodded again. "I'd be honored." He tapped his pen. "Thank you. We'll send details via email." He turned to leave, paused, then looked back. "Ms. Adams, what you did today, you turned something ugly into a catalyst for change. That takes real strength." Blair felt her throat tighten. She managed a soft smile. "I've had practice." As she exited into the terminal, the air felt different. Not cold and clinical, not dismissive. Instead, she sensed purpose. She carried it in her shoulders, in her rhythm of steps, in the careful way she held her head high. She spotted a newsstand and rifled through magazines until she found one with a headline that made her pulse jump. "Sky Atlantic CEO's daughter discriminated against in Flight Row. Airline announces policy overhaul." She looked closer. There was a photo of her in 1A, composed, dignified, eyes bright. Beside it was a short summary of the incident. She hadn't yet spoken to any reporters. It was official. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Hayden article just dropped. You ready for round 2? She took a moment to steady herself before replying. Ready, because the plane had landed. The first battle was won, but the fight for change was just beginning. As she walked away, Blair thought of the countless people who would never know her name, the ones who sat in seats assigned to them and were told they didn't belong, the ones whose protests went unheard, whose stories were buried beneath procedure and policy. If even one of them felt empowered by her actions today, it would all be worth it. Terminal lights flickered overhead, security scanners and departure boards glowed, and Blair Adams strode forward into the lights, determined to make sure her seat and the seats of everyone like her would never be questioned again. Sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Synerjet Air headquarters, casting long, warm rays across the executive conference room. Seated around the gleaming oval table were department heads, trainers, and senior leadership. The air smelled faintly of coffee and fresh notebooks. Papers lay neatly stacked before them, and attentive faces looked expectant as Blair Adams rose from her seat at one end of the table. She smoothed her navy blazer, feeling the familiar surge of nerves in her chest. It had been 4 days since the incident on board Flight 381, and company culture had been in upheaval ever since. Every board member, every flight attendant, every gate agent had replayed the moment Melinda Crawford had sneered, "This seat isn't yours," to her. They had witnessed her dignified silence, the CEO's arrival, the reassignment of the entitled passenger. They had watched Blair reclaim her seat and then carry the conversation forward, turning her experience into a system overhaul. Now they were here to listen. Blair cleared her throat softly. Though she saw no microphones, she felt as if her words would echo far beyond these walls. She began. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice calm yet resonant. "I know your schedules are packed, and this retreat is off-site by design to encourage open dialogue. Today, I want to talk about more than policies. I want to talk about empathy and accountability." A murmur rippled through the room. Blair paused, letting their attention settle back on her. "Last week, I boarded Flight 381 and was told that my rightful seat was unavailable. That moment was painful, but it was also telling. It revealed assumptions about who belongs, where, and why. But I chose to reclaim my seat without anger. Instead, I focused on the truth. The manifest confirms my assignment. It took one phone call, one shift in recognition, to correct a system-generated injustice." Blair looked around slowly, making eye contact with key stakeholders, Ms. Rivera from training, Mr. Chang from operations, Ms. Fletcher from human resources. But correcting a manifest is just step one. The real work is in preventing the error from happening again and ensuring that every employee understands the human impact of their decisions. She felt a tremor of energy pass through the room, heads inclined, pens poised. Blair continued, "Over these next weeks, we will pilot an empathy training program. It will include immersive exercises where frontline staff step into passenger shoes. We will bring in national experts on bias awareness and create role-play scenarios drawn directly from our own experiences. But beyond training, we need accountable leaders. We need metrics that measure dignity alongside on-time performance." The room was silent, the weight of her words settling in. Then a hand rose. It belonged to Mr. Klein, Vice President of Operations. the man who had initially questioned the need for added training. "Blair," he began, eyebrow raised, "how do you propose we measure something as subjective as dignity?" Blair nodded, expecting the question. "Great question. We will survey both passengers and crew anonymously after each flight, using standardized questions about respect, professionalism, and overall experience. We will analyze the data monthly. We will track patterns and correlate them with operational metrics, turnaround times, incident rates, and retention. Dignity can become a quantifiable performance indicator." Mr. Klein considered this, fingers tapping a pen on paper. Then he nodded slowly. "I think we can pilot that on our Denver-Atlanta route." Another hand rose. "Ms. Fletcher from HR, what about repercussions? If a flight attendant repeatedly scores low on these metrics, what happens?" Blair met her gaze. "Then we coach. If improvement does not follow coaching, we consider reassignment or disciplinary action. Because respect is not optional. It is core to our brand and safety culture." A few more questions followed about budget, about timeline, about executive support. Blair answered each with clarity and care, her confidence building as the meeting progressed. She drew from her own field notes, cited research on inclusive leadership, and proposed a 3-phase rollout training design, pilot metrics gathering, and full integration within 6 months. By the time the clock ticked toward the afternoon break, the executive team had agreed on key milestones. The chief people officer stood to offer closing remarks. "Blair, your experience and leadership have turned a moment of crisis into an opportunity for transformation. Thank you for sharing your story so openly. We will embark on this journey together." Blair allowed herself a small, genuine smile. After months of work behind the scenes, lobbying for culture change, she had finally broken through to the decision-makers, but the work was only beginning. As the meeting broke for lunch, Blair packed her notes and collected her thoughts. She stepped out into the adjacent breakout area, where catered platters of sandwiches and salads awaited. A few colleagues approached to congratulate her. Jade Williams, now working a corporate liaison role, found Blair and gave her a warm hug. "You are amazing," Jade said softly. "Thank you for doing this." Blair hugged her back, grateful for the genuine support. "We're going to make a difference." Over sandwiches, Blair caught up with Captain Green, who asked for more detail on the pilot metrics. She provided him with a printout of her proposal, and he nodded appreciatively. It felt good to collaborate with people who understood both the emotional and operational sides of the airline. Outside, snow began to fall lightly. The retreat was set at a mountain lodge near the Denver airport, a place of rustic charm that contrasted with the corporate setting. Blair walked outside for fresh air, inhaling the crisp winter chill. The snowflakes settled on her hair and shoulders, cooling her heated cheeks. She thought of Maya, bundled up at college, hearing about her mother's role in reshaping airline culture. She thought of the countless passengers who would now receive more dignity, thanks to this new training program. She thought of the day Flight 381 had taken off and how a single act of reclaiming her seat had triggered a wave of change. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Hayden. "Heard great things. Proud of you, as always." She smiled and typed back, "We're just getting started." The sky above was pale gray, the snow dancing on the wind. Below, cars and shuttles moved to and from the airport, but up here, at altitude, with the retreat behind her and the pilot program ahead. Blair Adams felt a deep calm. The turbulence of bias and entitlement still churned beneath the surface. But she had taken steps to steady the cabin. She inhaled deeply, savoring the cold air. Then she turned to head back inside, ready for the next phase of leadership, because reclamation was more than a moment. It was a movement, and she intended to keep the wings of change beating strong. Overcast skies loomed outside Denver International Airport as Blair Adams stepped onto the Synerjet crew shuttle bus. The chill in the air felt invigorating, a reminder that transformation often comes with discomfort. Today, she was not flying as a passenger, but as a mentor and observer for the inaugural empathy training flight, a pilot program she had championed. This was the true test of moving beyond policy into practice. At the training hangar, a small group of flight attendants, gate agents, and operations staff gathered around Flight 512, a narrow-body jet repainted inside to resemble the standard cabin. Tables laden with name tags and notebooks stood nearby, and a whiteboard displayed the day's agenda, role-play scenarios, perspective shifts, live cabin simulation, crew debrief. 4 cameras dotted the cabin for recording feedback. Blair entered the fuselage and was greeted by Jade Williams, now in a trainer's uniform. Jade offered her a warm hug. "I'm so glad you are here," Jade whispered. "The crew is ready." Blair nodded. "Let's get started." They led the participants through introductions. Each person shared their name, role, and why they joined the session. A gate agent named Priya admitted her nervousness about confronting unconscious bias. 2 senior flight attendants, Mark and Elena, nodded thoughtfully, acknowledging they were eager to learn new tools for empathy. Blair watched quietly, taking notes. The first exercise began with a simple prompt. Trainers handed out passenger profiles, fictional characters with needs and preferences. One profile described a grandmother named Rosa, who suffered from arthritis and needed extra time to stow her bag. Another profile described a business traveler named Martin, who was on a tight schedule and needed gate assistance upon landing. Participants practiced reading the profiles aloud, then switched roles. A trainee played the passenger, a coach played the crew member. They simulated stowing luggage, offering assistance, and responding to frustrations. Blair listened to the apologies and creative solutions. When someone faltered, she gently reminded them of the personal details that mattered most to the passenger. Mark paused to ask what he should say if he accidentally offended someone's dignity. Blair encouraged him to acknowledge the mistake, apologize sincerely, and offer a concrete correction. After lunch, they moved into the live cabin simulation. The group split into real and role-simulated passengers seated throughout the cabin. They flipped the cabin to passenger mode, dimming lights. Priya, the gate agent, played an anxious new mother with a sleeping baby who needed a bassinet. Elena, the flight attendant, approached with practiced calm, failing to offer the correct bassinet attachment, an intentional mistake by the trainers. The mother struggled before Priya. As the mother in character snapped, the session paused. The group gathered around. Blair stood and addressed them. "Notice how quickly frustration escalates when a basic need is not met. Now, let's try again. This time..." "Elizabeth," she turned to the trainer, "please coach Elena in real time. Speak softly into her ear. Guide her to offer reassurance and immediate action. Show empathy first, then solve the problem." They replayed the scene. This time, Elena knelt beside the mother, introduced herself by name, gently asked about the baby's comfort, listened to the mother's concerns, then calmly set up the bassinet and checked in twice more before moving on. The mother in character flashed a relieved smile. In the observation deck above the cabin, Blair sat beside Captain Green and Mr. Landon as they watched the monitors. "This is what I envisioned," Blair said softly, "turning standards into culture." Green nodded. "They are learning to see passengers as people, not just seats or assignments." Landon tapped his pen on the glass. "If we can replicate this across all our flights, we will see a genuine shift in customer satisfaction and crew morale." Blair felt her chest tighten with pride. They moved past theory into practice. But the real test lay ahead. That afternoon, they boarded a real flight, Flight 614 to Chicago, where a mixed group of veteran crew members would apply their training to actual passengers. Blair took a seat toward the rear of business class, near a window so she could observe without interfering. Jade and another trainer positioned themselves at the front with clipboards. As passengers boarded, the crew greeted them by name. Blair noted the sincerity in their voices. She watched flight attendants help elderly travelers with overhead bins, negotiate seating arrangements for families, and engage with genuine curiosity rather than rote script. One attendant knelt beside a visually impaired man, describing the cabin layout in detail and offering to escort him to the restroom at need. Blair recognized the profile from their training exercise. The man nodded appreciatively, mid-flight. The seatbelt sign chimed and a stewardess named Omar approached Blair's row. "Ms. Adams," Omar said with a respectful nod, "I just wanted to thank you. Today's training session was eye-opening. I've been in this industry for 15 years and never considered the cumulative weight of small interactions." Blair smiled. "Thank you. Omar, that means so much. What's your biggest takeaway?" He paused thoughtfully. "That empathy is not just a soft skill, it's a safety and satisfaction imperative. We all need reminders." Blair nodded. "Exactly. And now you're that reminder for others." She resumed her observation. Further toward the rear, Oliver gently guided a frustrated passenger whose child had spilled juice onto the armrest. Instead of brushing it off, Oliver apologized sincerely, handed him wet naps, and offered complimentary water. The man relaxed, thanked Oliver, and they struck up a friendly conversation. The cabin's mood felt warmer than any flight Blair had taken before. Even the hum of the engines seemed gentler. It reminded her of the early days when she'd flown as a guest to remote villages on humanitarian missions. Every passenger had been a rare and important individual, not just a ticket number. As the captain announced their descent, the trainers began discreet observations. They recorded interactions, noting both successes and areas to refine. When the plane landed smoothly at Chicago O'Hare, Blair and the trainers regrouped with the crew for a debrief in the galley. Papers shuffled as participants sat on the floor stalls, leaning against bulkheads, faces lit by relief and camaraderie. Priya, the gate agent, spoke first. "This was life-changing. I never realized how much more attentive I could be with a simple mindset shift." Mark, the flight attendant, looked at his colleagues. "We always aim for perfection and safety. Now we're aiming for perfection and care." Elena, still flushed from the morning role play, smiled shyly. "The mother scenario we did felt so raw. In a real cabin, you see frustration turning into gratitude in minutes when you simply listen." Blair closed her eyes briefly, savoring the moment. She rose and addressed them. "You have all done remarkable work today. This pilot program will refine our metrics, but your dedication is the real achievement. Change doesn't come from memos. It comes from moments where you choose humanity over protocol, empathy over expedience." A ripple of applause filled the narrow space. Even the cabin walls seemed to resonate with pride. Blair felt her phone buzz. A text from Hayden Data coming in looks great. You turned turbulence into trust. She looked at her watch. The day had flown by. Soon she would reconnect with Maya, recounting every detail. But first she let herself bask in the collective energy of committed professional discovering new purpose. As the debrief ended, Blair stepped out onto the tarmac for fresh air. The roar of arriving jets filled her ears, and the crispness of early winter chilled her cheeks. She inhaled deeply, closing her eyes against the flood of noise. This was only one flight, one day of training. The real challenge lay in sustaining momentum across the entire network of Synerjet Air. But for now, in this moment, she allowed herself to believe, because the sky had room for everyone, and today they had chosen to prove it. The cabin lights glowed softly as Flight 709 prepared for departure from Chicago O'Hare International Airport to Paris Charles de Gaulle. It was an overnight flight, and the business-class cabin hummed with a low buzz of anticipation. Blair Adams settled into seat 2A once more this time, not as a passenger under duress, but as an observer celebrating the earliest fruits of the Empathy pilot program. Months had passed since the incident on Flight 381 and the first training flight. The program had rolled out across 10 key routes, and preliminary data showed a remarkable 20% increase in passenger satisfaction scores and a 15% drop in crew turnover. The board had approved a full expansion. Today's flight served as a public showcase, complete with featured guests and media coverage. Blair closed her eyes for a moment, inhaling. She remembered the tense moments when a flight attendant first sneered at her seat assignment. She recalled reclaiming her dignity, then mobilizing change at the highest levels. She thought of the early role plays, the awkward simulations, and the moving real flight that had cemented empathy training as essential. Now she was part of a different moment, a moment of celebration. The flight attendant at the door greeted each passenger by name. Jade Williams led the team with quiet confidence. The other attendants followed suit, offering warm smiles and genuine attention. When Jade approached Blair, she whispered, "You look peaceful." Blair smiled. "This feels right." Soon, the cabin filled with familiar voices. A reporter from Global Aviation News sat across the aisle, her camera discreet but ready. She offered Blair a small wave. As the last passenger boarded, the cabin door closed and the safety demonstration began. A few hours later, after dinner service, Blair ventured back to the galley to chat with the crew. The soft hum of the engines provided a calming backdrop. Pilots' voices over the intercom reverberated lightly through the cabin walls. Blair found Captain Douglas Green reviewing the flight path with First Officer Elena Hayes. They looked up and greeted her warmly. "How are you finding this flight?" Blair asked, leaning against the galley bulkhead. Captain Green nodded. "Smooth so far. Crew morale is high. Passengers are more engaged. We haven't seen this level of positive feedback in my entire career." Elena, the first officer, smiled. "The training gave us permission to connect. It made a measurable difference. We aren't just following checklists, we are anticipating needs." Blair's chest swelled with pride. She gestured toward a tablet mounted on the bulkhead. "They've installed live sentiment trackers," she explained. "We can monitor real-time passenger feedback through in-flight devices. Right now, the overall positivity index is at 93%. Captain Green whistled softly. "That's incredible." Blair nodded, then turned to Jade Williams, who stood by the galley entrance. "Jade, how are you holding up?" Blair asked. Jade's eyes glowed with excitement. "It is amazing to see. Passengers are genuinely surprised when we address them by name. They buy the extra meal service because they trust we remember their preferences." A young flight attendant, Mark Sullivan, joined them carrying a tray. "Ms. Adams," he said, "I wanted to thank you for starting this program. I believe in it so much that I volunteered to mentor new hires." Blair nodded. "That's exactly the kind of leadership we need." Mark connected the tray to the service cart and left. Jade reached out and squeezed Blair's arm softly. "You did this," Jade whispered. "We did this." Blair glanced at the cabin before returning her gaze to Jade. "We all did, but the work isn't over." Jade's expression shifted. "I know. Next we head to full integration. 400 more routes, more languages, more cultural contexts." Blair set her jaw. "Then let's get to it." A sudden soft thump vibrated through the cabin. The seatbelt sign flickered. The flight attendant overhead barked a routine safety reminder. Blair pursed her lips. Not turbulence. She had coordinated with meteorology. This was intentional. The cabin door slid open near the cockpit, and Hayden Wycliffe stepped through. He approached Blair with a warm smile. "You ready for the Paris presentation?" he asked quietly. Blair nodded. "I have the speech prepared, but I want to go first." He raised an brow. "Go first." "Let me address the crew before the passengers," she said firmly. "They have earned it." He studied her, then nodded. "Of course." Minutes later, Blair stood at the front of the cabin as the lights dimmed further for the overnight flight. She cleared her throat. "Good evening, everyone," she began. Her voice carried clearly over the PA. "Thank you all for joining us on Flight 709. This service is special because it marks the first public demonstration of our company-wide empathy initiative." She paused, looking at their faces. Flight attendants in their crisp uniforms, pilots standing respectfully, gate agents observing through the galley, employees rested, alert, hopeful. "When I boarded Flight 381 in Denver, I was told my seat wasn't mine," she continued softly. It was a stark reminder of how easily dignity can be stripped away when we forget that every passenger is a person first. That moment set off a chain reaction, one that transformed policy into practice. A few passengers leaned forward. A couple of flight attendants wiped away tears. Blair held the moment. "Today, we gathered as frontline staff for immersive training. We practiced real scenarios. We learned to listen openly and deliver care beyond procedure. Tonight, you have all shown that empathy is not an add-on. It is as essential as safety checks and navigation. You have proven that small acts of respect can create a culture of trust." The cabin remained silent, attentive. Blair shifted to address the passengers. "To our valued guests, thank you for trusting us and for your patience as we refined our service. You have seen the difference tonight. We are committed to caring for you with the same respect that every member of our Synerjet family deserves." A light round of applause followed. Blair smiled, stepping back as Hayden took the PA. He added, "Thank you, Blair. and thank you to our entire crew. Your dedication will shape Synerjet Air for generations." Afterward, the cabin glowed with a soft energy. Passengers offered compliments and praise. A woman in row 4 asked Blair for a selfie. A businessman in row 2 shook her hand. Blair navigated the warm reception like a diplomat. Her heart was full. Later in the galley, Captain Green raised a bottle of sparkling water. "To new beginnings," he said. Blair clinked glasses. "To compassion in the skies." Jade grinned. "To making seats sacred again." They laughed together in that small space, united by purpose and pride. As Blair prepared to rest in her seat, she reflected on how far they had come. A single-seat dispute had sparked a movement. Now they were on Flight 709 demonstrating empathy at 40,000 feet, setting a new standard. Her phone pinged with a final message from Maya, saw the clip. "You crushed it. Proud of you. Mom." Blair closed her eyes, feeling the subtle descent and the steady course. Tomorrow they would land in Paris. But tonight they had landed in the hearts of passengers and crew alike. And in that, Blair found peace. The morning sun painted Paris in soft gold as Flight 709 glided toward Charles de Gaulle Airport. Blair Adams sat in seat 2A, gazing out at the patchwork fields below, alive with the first green shoots of spring. She pressed her palm against the cool window glass, reflecting the woman who had once been denied her seat and now stood at the forefront of a cultural change in aviation. Moments ago, the captain's voice had announced their descent and extolled the crew for an exemplary flight. Blair closed her eyes, feeling gratitude wash through her. Every challenge she had faced, every slight, every assumption, every moment of silence had led to this, a sky remade by empathy and accountability. She opened her eyes when Jade Williams approached, carrying a small tray with a cup of coffee. Jade offered it with a warm smile. Moments away from landing, Jade said softly, "Congratulations on a tremendous flight." Blair accepted the coffee. "Thank you, Jade. I couldn't have done it without you and the entire crew." They shared a brief nod of solidarity before Jade moved on to assist the other passengers. Blair settled back, sipping the coffee. It was bittersweet, creamy, perfect for the moment. The heady aroma grounded her, a reminder that small comforts mattered as much as grand gestures. Ahead of her, the cabin doors opened. Passengers rose to collect their belongings. A few paused to smile at Blair as they stepped by, offering thanks and admiration. She mouthed a silent, "You're welcome" to each, feeling their appreciation echo inside her. At the front, Hayden Wycliffe stepped into the aisle. He guided Blair by the shoulder through the deplaning curtain, and they descended the jet bridge together. Reporters and staff members from Synerjet Air waited near the gate. Cameras flashed and smartphones recorded the moment. A woman stepped forward with a microphone. "Ms. Adams, how does it feel to land in Paris after leading the first full-scale empathy-driven flight?" Blair paused, then spoke calmly but with conviction. "It feels like coming home. Not because of the destination, but because we have finally brought humanity back into the air." The reporters nodded, scribbling notes. Hayden offered Blair's hand to the woman next to the microphone. "Aren't you proud?" he whispered as they walked past. Blair looked at him, her eyes bright. "We're just getting started." Outside, ground staff stood at attention to welcome Blair and Hayden. A small brass band played a soft fanfare of French melodies as they stepped onto the tarmac. The light breeze carried the distant hum of arriving flights and the chatter of travelers. Blair inhaled deeply. The magnitude of the journey struck her from a tense confrontation in Denver to a revolutionary pilot flight, to this moment of public recognition in one of the world's great cities. "Mom," Hayden said quietly as they walked toward the awaiting van, "this is for you." Blair looked at him, touched and moved. "No, this is for all of us." He nodded, guiding her aboard. Crew members lined the steps to the van, offering respectful nods and smiles. Blair acknowledged each one. She noticed Jade standing beside Captain Green, sharing a quiet hug. The van doors closed, and they rolled away from the gate. The terminal recessing behind them looked like a stage they had triumphantly left. Blair rested her head against the window, eyes on the city skyline ahead. Paris stretched out before her classic limestone buildings, elegant boulevards, and the tip of the Eiffel Tower rising in the distance. It symbolized history, culture, progress. A city that had embraced revolution in the past. Blair thought of the revolution they had started in aviation, a revolution of empathy. It wasn't just about better service. It was about recognizing every human being's dignity in the most vulnerable moments when they flew the skies. She reached into her tote and pulled out her notebook. She flipped to a blank page and wrote 3 words, "Dignity takes flight." She underlined it twice. Then she wrote beneath it, "Next global rollout." Blair closed the notebook and tucked it away. Ahead lay the city's streets and an afternoon filled with presentations, meetings with international partners, and conversations about replicating the empathy initiative in Asia, Africa, the Americas, across every Synerjet region. But for now, she was here in Paris. For now, she had this moment. When the van stopped at the Hyatt Regency Paris Étoile, Hayden opened her door and extended his arm. Blair accepted. Stepping onto the sidewalk, a small group of Synerjet executives greeted them with flowers and applause. As they moved through the lobby, staff recognized Blair. A young receptionist handed her a boarding pass-style keycard. Room 1217. A note attached read, "Welcome home, Ms. Adams." Blair felt tears prick her eyes. A hotel room felt like home because she had made the world feel more like home for so many passengers. They ascended in the elevator, the mirror reflecting their determined faces. When the doors opened on the 12th floor, Blair and Hayden stepped into a corridor framed by soft rugs and elegant lighting. Blair unlocked the door to room 1217. She slipped inside, closing the door softly behind her. The room overlooked the city. She walked to the window, mesmerized by the Eiffel Tower bathed in morning light. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Maya. "I saw you on live stream. You changed everything. I love you." Blair smiled and typed back, "Love you too." She stepped back from the window and surveyed the room, a sanctuary for rest and reflection. She placed her coffee on the side table and sat on the edge of the bed, thinking of the path behind her and the road ahead. Her memories drifted to her earliest flight attendant days, to the moment she first learned to smile through adversity while straining to support her infant daughter. She remembered every late night of lobbying executives, drafting reports, pleading for respect and empathy to become core airline values, and she felt pride. Pride that she had not only reclaimed her own seat, but also created a path for countless others to be seen and heard. As the sun climbed higher, the room warmed. Blair rose, walked to the desk, and opened her laptop. A dozen emails awaited invitations to speak at global conferences, messages of gratitude from passengers, proposals for partnerships with human rights organizations. She opened a new document titled Empathy in Flight and began outlining her next book. Because her story and the stories of those she fought for deserved to soar far beyond corporate training sessions. She paused, taking a final look at the Eiffel Tower. This journey had been about more than changing airline procedures. It had been about changing hearts and minds, about proving that even in the most technical of industries, an industry built on schedules, metrics, and machinery feelings mattered. Empathy mattered, and dignity took flight. Blair exhaled quietly. She closed her laptop and placed it on the desk. It was time to rest. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more speeches, more planning, but tonight she would savor the moment. She would allow herself the luxury of peace. Blair stepped onto the balcony, the cool breeze brushing her face. Below, the city pulsed with life. Above, the sky seemed endless. She raised her arms, welcoming both, because the sky belonged to everyone, and she had helped make that true. What a journey! One moment of silent injustice turned into a powerful wave of compassion that swept across an entire airline. Blair Adams reminded us that true courage is not measured by volume, but by the strength to stand firm in your truth and spark change. Her story teaches us to cherish every person's dignity, to challenge unfairness whenever we see it, and to believe in the power of empathy. As we close this chapter, let us carry forward the lesson no one should be made to feel they do not belong. Let us honor those who use their voices for justice and condemn discrimination in all its forms. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment telling us which moment moved you most. Stay tuned for our next video, where we'll bring you another inspiring true story of resilience, hope, and transformation. Until then, thank you for flying with us. And remember, compassion always wins.